wouldn't want to be a little more influential? Whether trying to convince a client, change the boss's mind, or get your neighbor to finally trim their hedges, we'd all like to be a little more persuasive and better at changing other people's minds. How can we do that? Well, here are 3 tips based on the science of influence. First, be a chameleon. Second, harness the drive to be different. And third, pick a proximal peer. These tips will help you be more influential, motivate yourselves and others, and be more successful at home and at work. The first is to be a chameleon. Scientists studied what makes certain people great negotiators, what made people more likely to get a good deal even when reaching an agreement seemed tough. They looked at hundreds of negotiations, and they found that one simple trick led negotiators to be 5 times more successful. 5 times more likely to reach a deal and get a bigger slice of the pie even when it seemed tough, when all seemed lost. That trick? Subtly imitating or mirroring their partner's mannerisms. Imagine sitting across the table from someone else in a tough negotiation. And imagine that person crosses their legs. Well, if these people's partner crossed their legs, the person did the same. If their partner tilted their head to the side, they did the same. And if their partner gestured with the right hands, well, they imitated that as well. Just like chameleons change color to fit their surroundings, negotiators who subtly copied the behavior and language and mannerisms of the person they were talking to had much better outcomes. And it's not just in negotiations. The same tricks work in all sorts of contexts. Take a sales context. Waiters and waitresses who mimic their patron's order, word for word, get 70% higher tips. Speed daters who talked more similarly to one another were more likely to go on a second date. So don't just listen, emulate. Trying to convert a job interview, convince a client, or turn a first date into a second? Well, be a chameleon. If an interviewer leans back on the chair and crosses their legs, do the same. If a client starts emails with hey instead of dear, adopt that language. Subtle shifts can deepen social bonds and turn strangers into allies. Mimicry, or being a chameleon, is only one of many often invisible influences that affect behavior. But people don't just do the same thing as others. Sometimes they do something different. Influence is like a magnet. Sometimes it attracts and sometimes it repels, which brings us to our second tip, harnessing the drive to be different. Scientists examined this idea at a beer tasting. They offered groups of patrons sitting together the opportunity to sample 1 of 4 house beers. After drinking the beer, customers answered a couple simple questions. How would they like the beer? Did they wish they had chosen a different one? And there was one additional detail. Half the tables went around the normal ordering process. The waiter gave them the menu, told them about each beer, and then went around the table one by one, asking which beer people wanted. At the rest of the table, people ordered privately. The waiter still gave them menus and described each beer, but customers marked down their order on scraps of paper, folded them, and handed them in so no one else could see what they ordered. The 2 ordering situations were almost identical. Everyone chose from the same set of beers and received the same information. The only difference was whether people knew what others had selected before making their own choice, whether they knew what other people had chosen before choosing themselves. But when researchers analyzed the data, they found a striking gap between the 2 groups. People who knew what others had ordered were much less satisfied with the beer they chose. Just happening to see what others are choosing made them much less satisfied with their own choices, and they were 3 times as likely to regret their choice. Why? Well, because many of the people who had seen others' choices had switched their order to be distinct. They picked a different option than they normally would to be unique, to avoid ordering the same beer as someone else. Sometimes people don't want to be the same as everyone else. Sometimes they want to be different. Particularly if people feel like too many others are doing something, they may want to do something separate and different and be unique. When talking about a famous restaurant, for example, Yogi Berra famously quipped, "Nobody goes there anymore, it's too crowded." And the same thing can be said for anything that gets too popular. Once something becomes too popular, some people avoid it and they go ahead and do something different. We've talked about being a chameleon and harnessing the drive to be different. And now we'll discuss the third principle, picking a proximal peer. How can we push ourselves to get off the couch and start exercising, or motivate ourselves to take an action? And how can we influence and motivate others? Well, it turns out that social comparisons, or comparing ourselves to others, is a great way to motivate ourselves and others to take action. Scientists went door to door in one community in California, and they tried a number of pitches. One was about saving money. They told people they could save lots of money by being helpful and nice to the environment, turning down their air conditioning and turning down their heat. Another group, they focused on just saving the environment itself, how they could do good for the world by turning down their AC and turning down their heat. And a third group, they focused on helping the community by being good to the environment. They asked each of these groups how effective they thought the pitches would be, how likely people would be to change their behavior after hearing the pitch. And most people said, sure, definitely, I definitely changed my behavior. But then the scientists followed up a few months later and looked whether people actually changed their behavior. Did those pitches actually lead them to use less energy? And it was almost like the scientists hadn't come by at all. People didn't change energy consumption one bit. Why didn't it work? Why did all these pitches fail? Well, there was actually a fourth pitch that turned out to be quite effective. It wasn't about money or about saving the environment or about helping your community. Very simply, it was about what other people were doing. People that were told their neighbors were saving energy, their neighbors were using fans or turning down their air conditioning or turning down their heat, were more likely to save energy themselves. Just knowing what other people were doing was enough to get people to take action. It's clear then that others can motivate us to work harder and save energy, but does it matter how our performance matches up to theirs? Imagine receiving an energy bill that says your neighbor is using half as much energy as you, or trying to work out with someone who is twice as fast or could lift twice as much. Would you still feel motivated, or would you give up? Well, peers can be a powerful motivating force, but not all peers are helpful. It turns out it depends on how your performance stacks up to the competition. So rather than comparing yourself or others to just anyone, pick a proximal peer, a comparison that makes you or others feel close or slightly behind. If you're trying to motivate a sales team, compare their performance to a competitor who's doing slightly but not too much better. If you're running a 10K, pick someone slightly faster than you to use as a pacer. Comparing people or yourself to others that are just slightly ahead will increase motivation and performance. Overall, we've discussed 3 tips to increase your influence. We've talked about being a chameleon or using the power of mimicry, harnessing the drive to be different or people's desire to be unique and stand out, and motivating others and yourself by picking a proximal peer. The more you understand about how influence works, the more you can harness its power.